I'm June Gruber, an associate professor of psychology at the University of Colorado Boulder and director of this mental health expert series. I'm delighted to be here today with Dr. Jane Mendle, an associate professor of human development at Cornell University, about her innovative work on puberty and mental health. Thank you, Jane, for being here today.
I'm excited to talk to you.
So I wonder if we could get started just hearing a little bit about the kind of mental health research you do.
Yeah, so I study the transition from childhood to adolescence, which is puberty. And it is an important thing to study from a mental health perspective for a few reasons. The first is that we see a really significant spike in psychological difficulties for kids at this age. It's actually more typical than not typical for kids to have problems at this age. And so understanding part of what makes the transition challenging is really important. And so that is a lot of what I do, is figure out what makes it difficult and are there factors that can be changed or modified to make it a little bit easier for kids.
So how did you go about first getting started in this just really important line of work that you do?
You know, like most things in life, it was a little bit coincidental and accidental. I didn't set out to have a research career in studying the psychology of puberty. I was a graduate student in clinical psychology. I went to the University of Virginia, and I was in a lab meeting with a bunch of other graduate students and my faculty advisor one day, and we were talking about a particular statistical design, not very exciting, that we had been doing and working on. And one of my lab mates said, "Hey, did anyone see that journal article that just came out about girls' puberty? It seems like that would be really, really a good use of this statistical design." And I just said, "I'll do that. That sounds interesting to me." It was just instinctive, very impulsive. That seems interesting. I'll go look at that. And so from that, it was like dominoes. I did that article. I did another article on the topic, and then before I knew it, I had done a whole lot of articles on the psychology of puberty and why kids find the transition challenging, and that was what I did. So I suppose it wasn't quite as idiosyncratic as it seems, because it played to a lot of interests I'd had about adolescence, about coming of age, about how social and biological factors intersect with each other, which is really at the heart of puberty. But at the exact moment, all I was thinking of was, that sounds interesting. I'm happy to take that on.
I love that story, just about these almost, serendipitous events in life that then, as you're saying, start a whole path of dominoes kind of falling into place.
A lot of undergraduate students ask me, how did you get to be where you are? And I think that they have an idea that there's this very intentional path that you follow. And if you do A and B and C and D, then you end up as a faculty member. And in some ways that's true, but in a lot of other ways, I don't think I realized the pivotal choices I was making at the time I was making them. I think that I followed things that were interesting and appealing to me, and they all cohered eventually.
So in thinking about just where you got started and where you are now, and reflecting on that whole trajectory of amazing body of work, what have been some notable, frustrations or failures along the way, as well as important successes that you've savored that just really stand out to you?
Yeah, so I think being a psychological researcher is often filled with frustrations. There are lots of frustrations along the way, not the least of which is that the work we do is pretty hard. People are very mercurial, and there is not a really good way to understand the huge individual variability in people. It's something that thousands of people have spent their lives trying to figure out. And so I have had research projects that did not go the way I thought they would, or the research process went seamlessly and then the data didn't show much of anything, and I couldn't understand why, and I couldn't understand, a lot of it I was like, I must have made a mistake, because if I did this properly, my hypothesis would be supported. And sometimes that's not the case. Science is about testing hypotheses, not knowing the answer beforehand. So I've had things in which I've invested a lot of time that just didn't go the way I had hoped. I've had things that were confusing or contradictory. There have been projects that went really easily and projects that went really challengingly. I suppose that some of the work that I have been most proud of has not been the work that is necessarily the most cited work that I've done. I have an article out right now, which is really, really looking at what goes on in the minds of young girls. I don't think we necessarily give young girls a voice enough, and I think very often we over rely on parental reports of what kids are doing. I had hoped that this article would be more publicly, would make more of a splash within our community than it did scientifically, but I think it coincided with COVID and people's energies and attentions turned elsewhere, and maybe it'll come back up. But I do think of that work, it was a really, really large scale, intensive process of getting girls to write about a variety of different aspects of their lives. It was just a ton of organizational details, a lot of energy and money, and just thinking about all aspects of how to find community partners, how to make girls feel comfortable, how to make their parents feel comfortable. And so I am proud that that came to fruition. And it took about 5 years from day one till the day it came out in the journal. So it wasn't a short process.
What persistence too, to have to hold on to a project over that amount of time and see it to the end.
Yeah, I think that a lot of psychologists have to have a lot of persistence.
Absolutely. I think too about our paper on the future of women in psychological science and how much persistence that took.
You know, yeah, that's a good point. We just collaborated on a project on what female academic researchers and within psychology, and what are some of the challenges they faced, and where is equity in the field today, and what are some suggestions and conditions that we can think about to move it forward. And that was a 4-year process from start to finish, and we collaborated on this. It was the largest scale collaboration that I've ever done. What was it, 50 or so authors, maybe even more, on the final manuscript from all different universities, all different types of universities, departments, training, areas of psychology. So a very, very large scale collaboration.
Yeah. I mean, so thinking about some of the successes and these recent large scale collaborations, when you kind of look forward within your, subfield of puberty, the transition to adolescence and mental health, and even thinking more generally about our field of mental health, what do you see as the most important next steps?
So I'm going to speak personally for my area of research. So one of the things that we know is that there's a significant gender discrepancy in prevalence of depression, with women 2 to 3 times more likely to report depression than men. So that discrepancy does not exist in childhood. We know that in childhood, boys are actually a little more likely than girls to be depressed. And we know that it doesn't exist at the start of puberty, but by the midpoint of puberty, it is very evident, and it remains entrenched through a large period of the lifespan, but it goes down a lot when women hit menopause. Now, when you look at the literature on depression and gender differences in depression, the lifespan is chopped up. People study childhood, they study adolescence, they study emerging adulthood, or just adulthood. But there's not this comprehensive theory that links all of these different pieces together. I don't know that I have the answer, but I would love to see a theory that tests why are gender differences in depression most pronounced during women's childbearing years. I don't want to overemphasize the role of hormones and underemphasize the role of social factors. I also would question whether it is purely a societal explanation, and I would love to see a theory that integrates all of these different pieces to try to understand why that's the case.
That would be really powerful.
It's huge. It's huge. The field is really segmented in how it thinks of people. I can't think of anybody who has really targeted this from menarche to menopause perspective on trying to understand that. Maybe that's an idea for the very, very next thing I should tackle.
You could be the leader on that topic. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, we could do a large-scale collaboration.
Large-scale collaboration, exactly. So the last question I had for you, Jane, was really, what advice would you have for others, perhaps those watching this interview today who may be interested in the field?
I think getting involved is key. I think understanding that frustration and rejection and disappointment are often part of the world of a psychological scientist, particularly one who is a researcher, is pretty important. I think in the early stages of my career, I wasn't as aware of how inherent it is and how there's so many talented people doing this work. And it's just, yeah, it's just really a part of the process. Sometimes things go places and sometimes they don't. And yeah, focusing on the broader science, but also, yeah, getting involved, reaching out, talking to people, yeah, and understanding that there's a lot of opportunity in this field and a lot of topics to study.
Thank you so much, Jane, for speaking with us today and sharing just such wonderful insights and, big picture visions of the field. Really grateful for talking to you and your time.
Yeah, thanks for asking me.